This is essentially a runway that's been eroded through flooding. So before we took over and started doing what we're doing, we had, like I told you, when it got dry, Dad had opened up all the gates in the farm, the cows that have access to the whole property. I remember coming out here at the end of 2018 and the paddocks were dust. The cattle were gone. There was paddies on the ground, cattle paddies this big, and you could pick them up, throw them like frisbees. When they hit the ground, they didn't even break. They were rock hard. And so you can imagine what this looked like. This was bare, because this is where the water is last. You know, when everything dries up, your little divots and your ponds and everything is where the water sits. So the animals come here for a drink, and there's a little bit of green pick growing around the edge of the water, so the cattle get into that too. And north of us is Thaguna, which is an estate, like a suburb. And only 10, 15, 20 years ago, a lot of it was pasture and ponds. And now it's exclusively roofs and roads. So what happens to all the water when it rains? It used to get soaked up and held, and now it gets passed down to us. So it comes roaring down here. So last night, if we had 40 mil instead of 10, we'd all be over our ankles in water. We flood like that. We at the moment, we're going under 5-6 times a year. So I'm trying to figure out what to do with all my chickens at the moment. Need a backup plan. But because we would let the cattle come in here, because they'd want to drink, they'd all come in at the same time, and they'd graze the last little bit of green pick that was managing to grow on the bank, and then they'd roll in it. You know, they'd get down and rub their necks on a bit of dirt to help them with the fleas and the lice and whatever else it was. When it rained, there was no ground cover holding the soil together, so what happens? The water takes the dirt and it erodes. So these ponds, chain of ponds here, are twice as wide as when my parents purchased this property 20 years ago. A little bit might have been to do with me and the motorbike, but mainly it was the cattle. Twice as wide. Funny story, we used to have motorbikes here because that's what this property was for. It was a lifestyle block to be reckless. And one day, not long after I'd taken over, we were rounding up the cattle, walking them up real gentle with a hot wire, and one got out and my dad saw it and he fires up the motorbike and he rips into the paddock doing wheel stands. Dad's a great rider, doing wheel stands. And he got that cattle so upset, foam coming out of its mouth. And that's what we used to do, but I'm like, I'm a changed man, Dad. I don't really like this. And it really upset me. And I said something to him and he blew me off. And he and Mum went to Europe for a fortnight and I sold all the motorbikes while he was gone. Got rid of them all. So we haven't had that problem happen since.
So was this a natural spring? So I didn't hear
it's runoff. Yep, so it's not fed by anything, it's just runoff. At the moment, we're holding water all year just because of the wet seasons we've had. But the first thing we did was we fenced it out. We want to keep animals out of all of our riparian areas, and we did that with a poor boy fence. This is my trademark TM poor boy fence. So, like, folks, infrastructure is expensive, the equipment, and the labour to put it in is also expensive. When we were buying those Pickets, bundles of 200, they were $7.50 each. I believe they're closer to $10 each at the moment. The wire's expensive, the porcelain insulators that Dad insists on are expensive, and it all takes time. To put up a fence like that, which is a picket every 4 metres, barbed wire, 6-strand, hot wire, like it takes a long time, and you put so much into it, you'll never move it. That fence is in the wrong spot, but I can't move it because it costs too much to put it there. So what we do with these poor boy fences, we figured out if we do a picket every 10 metres, it's enough to stop the wire from sagging. Any further it sags too much, any closer there's no gains. So we've taken pickets from every 4 to every 10 metres, so we've cut our cost of pickets in the third. And Mr. Michael, who was the farmhand, he's just left us, but he was with us for nearly 4 years. He and I built this, and I'll be honest, it was mainly him. It's 750 metres long on each side, so we built 1.5 kilometres of it in under a day. Yeah. Just threw it up, and it cost, very little. And we're not attached to it. So when it no longer serves our purpose, we'll rip it out, reuse it again. So the reason that's there is to keep the animals out of here, because we don't want them coming into the water. Because what happens is the cows all come in for a drink. You've got that environmental degradation I just explained, the erosion, because they bear off the soil. What also happens is the cattle all walk in there and stand up to their bellies. They drink, urinate and defecate. You get a trifecta. So when I have the school groups come out here, the kids are all glassy-eyed going, who cares, show us the chickens, So everyone, when you go home tonight, and Mum and Dad are serving dinner on the dining room table, grab your cup, go to the toilet, fill it up, come home, back to the table and drink it with your dinner. So that's what you're asking the cattle to do. You're asking them to drink their own feces and urination and everyone else's. Why does it make any sense? We want to give our animals clean water. This is why they get parasite burdens and you have to worm and drench them. We've got animals that we're putting in unsanitary conditions where we're forcing them to graze around yesteryear's manure patches, and we're forcing them to drink out of urine banks as well. So by fencing them out of the riparian areas, and you can give them this water, you just throw a pump in the pond there and put your portable trough there and pump the water. They can have the same water, it's just no longer contaminated with what their body's trying to expel. And because we're looking after the welfare of the animal, we've got rid of chemical use, which is great, healing food, tick. The environment's responding really well, and all of that is because we've looked after the animal properly. Does that make sense? We're not giving it crappy water, so the environment is responding beautifully, and the food's responding beautifully. Now there's always a smart aleck who says, but Jake, in the wild, animals drink out of ponds and waterways. They do, but they're migratory animals like we spoke about before. So it'd be a heavy impact, long recovery period. So they turn up to a running creek, they'd all get a gut full, and they wouldn't be back at that same running creek. Then they'd be back in 6 months when they're coming back the other direction, or whatever it is. They don't camp out there in a historical natural setting. The beautiful thing is once you've fenced it off, that's just one single hot wire to keep the animals out. Then you can start working on revegetating your land and planting some trees. So these trees cost me $1 each, just tube stock, and we put, I think this creek line's about 1,000 trees, and they've almost all come up. 4 years old now. In another year or so, we'll be able to start running the cattle up this corridor and crash grazing it. So we might let them have a section of it for a day and let them muck around in it, eat all the grass that's oxidized, whatever else, put some manure down, help the nutrient cycle start, and then they won't come back for 6 months, 12 months, let everything repair, because animals are tools. We need them to shape and build fertility in our landscape. So these areas we fence off from the animals eventually go dormant if we don't let the animals have some sort of impact. So what I mean by that is this grass here, this grass all here from last year is all oxidized, so all the nutrients that were in it have vaporized into the atmosphere. There's nothing left in this, not like a nice green grass. The cows don't really want it. And this is shading out the undergrowth. So if we let this go for years and years and we get a big blanket of it, which has happened in areas on the farm while we're letting it recover before animals come back, when the growing season comes, this is not going to let any sunshine penetrate the canopy to the ground, nothing's going to germinate, and the ecosystem stalls. You just end up with all this dead matter. One way the environment responds to that is fires. Burn all this up, bear off the soil again, new species can start. But you're just letting everything go when you burn it. Why not use cows? Because if I force them into a small area, they'll eat that. They'll compost it in their rumen. They'll deposit it right on the pasture. I don't need to hire a manure spreader for the weekend. They'll put it right where I want it, and they'll get that nutrient cycling again, and they'll let that new undergrowth come through. Does that make sense? How they're an environmental tool? We can't really do it without them. The only substitute for the cattle is heavy machinery and diesel and labour. 3 things that are really expensive. You've got the cow, which is an appreciating asset. Not only do they appreciate in value when they do this work, but they also appreciate doing it. And you compare that against liabilities, equipment, fuel and labour, the liability trifecta.
On the point of fencing off the land to prevent contamination of water, this goes back to the idea of the context in which the animal or the human is existing. So when the cattle or the pigs are in confined feeding operations, when they're defecating in their own living area, that is the key factor that necessitates the use of the subtherapeutic antibiotics. That is the reason why you need to use chemical inputs, because the animal isn't in an appropriate environment. When you put the animal back in its appropriate environment, you don't need the chemical inputs anymore. The exact same thing applies to humans. When you put a human in an office cubicle and you feed it carbohydrates, refined grains and seed oils, you get overweight, you become obese, you get visceral fat. And all that reverses when you put the human back in its native environment. So that's a parallel.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, practicing these values, I guess, or production values. We're completely unmedicated for 4 years on the farm. We've used no herbicide, miticide, fungicide, suicide, homicide. I haven't had to kill anyone. they're just like the neighbours spray for things. I can see why they're spraying, and I can also see why they need to spray. It'll be really easy to get around it, but we're all stuck in our own paradigms. But we don't have. I've given. What have I done? I've given 2 cows antibiotics, and that's it in 4 years. I've never drenched. I've never wormed. I've never used antibiotics on any other animal. I buy. We'll talk about it later, but I buy jerseys from the dairy to breed them, and they're predisposed because of the way they've been selectively bred by the dairies. They're predisposed to mastitis. So I've got herbal remedies. There's only, if you're too late or if it's a big issue, there's only so far you can go, and it comes down to like, would you give it to your kids if they were in that much trouble? You know, I would. So we use them, but what we do, just as a side note, is if we have to use antibiotics on those animals, we don't sell them through our label because our pledge is antibiotic free. So we sell it off to commodity markets and let some other chump deal with it. We used to use the Polyface Farm chicken tractor design, which is the little square boxes on the ground, and they've serviced us for 3 years of dabbling in pastured poultry, but I feel like we can do better. So this is what we're working with at the moment, and the concept of this is to have birds on pasture being moved to fresh pasture daily. So to give you an idea, these birds arrive. Can you hear me down there? These birds arrive. Can you quieten down? You want to hear that sound, that chirping's happy birds. If it's quiet, I've actually got sound sensors in my brooder, and it Wi-Fi's to my phone, and I can monitor carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, sound, temperature, humidity, the whole lot. These guys, we get them as 1 day old. They're a meat genetic bird called broiler. So this is not a bird that's going to lay an egg. This has been selectively bred and engineered for feed efficiency and growth rate. So these birds here are not even, what are they? They're 27 days old. Yep. So your chick at home would like just be starting to get feathered up and moving. So we get them as a day old. They weigh 40 grams. I've got a brooder up at the shed that I've built, and if anybody wants to look at it later, I can show you, but there's no birds in it right now, so I didn't take us there. All 700 go in there. It's a 40-foot container, insulated container. I've got automatic feed, water, heating, cooling, extraction fans in there, all synced up to my phone so I can see what's going on. They're in there for 21 days. We monitor growth rate, feed them, add deep bedding. We're continuously adding more carbon to the floor to soak up their manure. And on day 21, we bring them out onto pasture and put them in one of these schooners. This mob, we brought 783 out to pasture, so we lost 17, which is it's a really good metric, even comparing to the sheds. You know, the guys that are using subtherapeutic, antibiotic-laced foods and everything, it'd be a good metric. So we're doing all right. And then these guys are put in these structures, and we tow these with our vehicle currently sideways. We go widthways every day. We tow them along. Well, we strive to every day. So if you look out here, they were here yesterday. You can see the manure on the ground. That's 24 hours of manure. And they haven't impacted the forage super hard, because even though we've got 700 birds, we've probably got 500 kilos of chicken. When we look at the next shed, we've got 700 birds, but we've probably got closer to 2 ton of chicken in there because of what they weigh now, and they just obliterate the pasture. It's incredible. What we're working towards is automating this enterprise. So I'm on to my 4th iteration of how to move these. My tractor broke down. I went to go get it fixed, and it was $14,000 to get the part to fix it, and the tractor was worth about 10 grand. So I traded into the wreckers, and my farm hands keep begging me for a tractor, but the reality is at the moment we can't quite make one happen, and they won't appreciate this. But it's a good exercise to innovate how to run your farm without one. A tractor's a liability. You know, in cost and repairs and maintenance and purchase price and labour. You still need labour to drive a tractor. So what we did was, I've got these brackets here on each side, and I bolted a winch onto it, a car winch, and I attached the end of the winch to something, and I turned it on and I dragged it, and it dragged pretty well, and it was moving nice and slowly. But because they're not evenly balanced, it started turning, which started ruining the spooling on the winch, so the winch wasn't coping with it too well. So I've got another design in my head, but the goal, if you come back to Wolki Farm in 4 or 6 months for another look, what I hope you would see is these shelters moving automatically daily with no staff being involved. So we're going to have solar panels and a battery bank hooked up to the winch. The winch will gear right down, so it drags 1 metre a minute, slow enough that the birds don't get trapped under the edges. The other one, I've got water on the ground here because I only just finished building this on Monday. The other one, we've got automated water that hangs, and I've got feed systems that'll hang as well. So at the moment, this is quite chore intensive to us, but I'm almost certain I can get pastured poultry doing daily moves, feed and water organised for under 15-minute chores a day. Give you an idea, this is a bit over $20,000 worth of chicken for us. So if I can do that with under 15 minutes of labour a day, I'll be pretty happy.
Is your abattoir on here as well?
We currently have to take these birds to Melbourne. Yep. We get here at 11 p.m. We take the birds off feed first thing in the morning. Then we get here at 11 p.m. We catch them all, we load the truck, we get on the road, we get to the abattoir at 4:30, unload and drive home. And then 2 days later, I drive down again and pick them up. Yep. So when you buy a whole chicken off me, a 1.6 kilos, size 16 whole chook, it's about $35. And it's $7 just for me to get it killed in transport, fuel and slaughter fees. You know, that $9 whole chook you buy at Coles, already cooked, already stuffed. These birds cost me $4 each just to get going. We'll talk about this in my presentation tomorrow, but the economy of scale that we're battling against is enormous. Like I said, Australians are consuming on average 1.6 million chickens a day. America does 1 billion a week. 1 billion. This bird it comes out of the brooder at the moment. I'm getting them out of the brooder at 21 days old at about 700 grams. I need to get it, and I think I can tweak it a little bit more, get it a little bit bigger, but it comes out at 700 grams. And then it's 3 weeks, well, at the moment, because it's cold, they're burning more energy to heat themselves. So they're taking about 4 weeks on pasture, so another 28 days on top of 21 in the brooder, 49 days. The sheds are slaughtering them at 28 to 32 days out of their sheds, because the birds they don't have as much space to move, so they're not there's no incentive to move because there's nothing to explore, there's no grass. So, moving burns energy when you could be putting weight on. They are in climate controlled environments, their whole production, so they're not having to kickstart their temperature regulation on so they can put more weight on. They're given 4 different feeds over their 4 or 5 week life to optimize growth curves of different protein levels. We give them a chick starter and a finisher. We don't have the facilities and the sophistication to do 4 different feeds. And they're using antibiotics in their feed. When Australia outlawed hormones for the use of chicken and pigs, if you see someone that's advertising their chicken and pork's hormone free, like so is everyone else's in Australia. Cattle and sheep, they can still use hormones in a feedlot if they like, but they got rid of hormones. But the animals need antibiotics in those environments to stay alive. If you went into one of those sheds and took all the birds off antibiotics for the whole production, it'd be carnage, because look at the amount of manure they put down yesterday. Imagine that in a closed shed for 4 weeks. Look at when you see these big birds, how much they're putting down. It's septic. The environment is anaerobic. Here it's aerobic. When I got here this morning, I was a little bit upset because there was so much water on the ground. The poo started smelling because it starved the oxygen, and my manure yesterday was aerobic. It was composting, and then because it got wet and got starved of oxygen, it went anaerobic. It started getting sour on your nose. One of our rules on the farm is your nose knows. If something stinks, you're doing it wrong. Move them. And that's exacerbated in a wet season. Their birds are in that same environment the whole time. They have to give them antibiotics to keep them healthy, but it's a growth accelerant. So they're also able to hit market quicker. So we don't use any antibiotics, we don't use any medications on farm. They get a milled feed. Everybody wants to know what's in the food. Oh, there's a nail. No, it's not. It's a milled grain. We don't use a pellet. This is just what we get. It's all the grains you'd expect. So it's wheat, barley, corn, soy, whatever. So it's not a PUFA free. If you're wanting your food to be polyunsaturated fatty acid free in the consumption of its diet, these are not it. I get asked all the time, I could raise my chickens soy and corn free. This is a GMO free crop, so it hasn't been Roundup. I could do it free of those feeds, but the feed would be more expensive and they'd take longer to grow, which means more labour and they'd eat more and more incurred losses. So my chickens will be more expensive. And what I try to tell people, if you're on a really restrictive diet for your health and you need to be like really dogmatic, like just eat grass-fed beef, right? You know, you can't go too wrong with it. But I'd love to do soy-free feed. When I started, I couldn't get GMO-free feed. So I was feeding my animals GMO grains, which is, you know, 99% of what there is in Australia. But because I got to build my volume up a little bit and I kept getting feedback from my customers, I kept telling the mill, and eventually the mill said, here's a GMO-free feed for you, Jake. And then all of a sudden, all the other local egg producers that were doing pasture-raised eggs cottoned onto it, and now we've all got GMO-free feed. But it started with people supporting me when I was doing the best I could with what I had. So at the moment, the best I've got with what I've got is corn and soy-fed chicken and pork. Because that's what the industry is. But if we go from those 350 pigs this year to 5,000 in next year because the demand's insatiable, maybe we'll buy our own mill.
Is it not possible to get feed without soy?
It is, it just costs more and the birds grow slower. So I can produce it. If somebody wanted to put an order in for a few hundred birds, I could do it for them. I have to run the numbers, but instead of being a $30, $35 bird, it could be a $40 to $5. Another question is, why don't you raise heritage breed chickens and dual purpose, you know, your old Wyandottes or your Leghorns or your Australorps, because I talk about animal welfare, and when we get to the sheep and the cattle, I'll be talking about you need genetics that are fit for purpose. You know, these birds don't do a great job of staying alive. Like they need a fair bit of help. But if I was to raise a heritage breed chook for someone to eat, take me 5 or 6 months. It'd be $100 to buy it in like incurred feed and labour costs. And when you got home and you poached it or you sautéed it or whatever you did, you'd send it back asking for a refund, because the reality is no one here has ever eaten one. You've never accidentally eaten a dual purpose chicken. If last night we had dinner at Yardbird and we got some of the Wolki Farm chicken, they're great supporters of ours, and everyone's, oh, so tender, it's so moist, so delicious. It's like, if I snuck a bit of dual purpose chicken in there and they served it up, everyone would have sent it back, because as a society, we don't know what it's meant to be. We've lost that food intelligence. We don't know how to do it anymore. There's so many things that we're out of touch with. So I'd love to do that idealistic dual purpose, corn free, soy free, whatever, wherever we can get to that one day. But at the moment, this is what the industry is. And it's hard enough doing it like this.
It's interesting that you say you feed them soy and they grow quicker, and the same thinking, or the opposite thinking, is we feed people soy and they're going to suddenly get healthy.
Yes, yeah. Well, for us, it just comes down to protein availability for the animals. Yeah.
Soy does something that might be the poofers in it that makes the chicken grow faster.
It could be, but something else to consider is chickens aren't humans.
Yeah.
You know, like, what's the diet of a chicken? My sons and I, we do a little bit of twitching. When we go on holidays, the best thing to do with kids is buy a pair of binoculars and get a bird watching book. And when you're on holidays and you're sitting down having a cup of coffee or you're at the beach, you find the birds and then you write in the book where you were, who you were with, and when it was. And it's a great little keepsake. We love doing it. And in the start of the book, it shows you the 5 different types of beaks that birds have and what their associated diet is. So some birds with a long skinny beak consume nectar, your hummingbirds. Other birds, like a parrot, eat nuts. They've got a big, wide, powerful beak to crunch nuts and things. Other birds with short little sharp beaks eat like a sparrow or a swallow, eat insects. They zip around the air. They've all got different diets. So these guys are omnivores. And so by proxy, grains are part of a species appropriate diet for chickens. So whether we want to be giving them highly refined, genetically modified, desiccated soy, you know, like, probably not. But to say that grains, for like Dr. Chafee asked me last night what would happen if I didn't give these birds grain. They'd all be dead in 3 days. They'd all starve to death. They couldn't exist on grass, because we've got a 19% protein feed here and we've got a 4% protein grass here. There's not enough hours in the day for them to get the nutrition they need.
Jake, we decided not to give our chickens soya.
Yep.
And they started eating each other.
Yeah. Yep.
They need the protein.
Yep.
They eat each other to survive.
Yep.
We soon learned to put the soya back in.
Yeah. Yep. It's horses for courses. You know, during lockdowns, the pork industry in America collapsed because all the restaurants closed down and all the pork demand dried up, and it's just in time logistics. You know, the industry needs 1 million pigs a day, let's say, and so they're processing 1 million a day and they're freighting 1 million a day, and when the supply chain stopped, when the abattoirs stopped, 1 million a day started banking up. So what the custom hog producers started doing was giving away all their pink pigs, you know, the pink ones that are in the factory farms. They started giving them all away to homesteaders, and then the homesteaders couldn't keep up because we only want 2 and we only want 6. And then they started gassing the pig. You can find footage of this on the internet. They started gassing the sheds to suffocate all the pigs. So, you know, taking out all the oxygen, and they'd all suffocate and die. And then the industry ran out of gas. So they started closing all the vents and turning the temperature up. And they sweated them to death. Pigs don't sweat. They sweat out of the tip of their nose, and they've got a little gland on their ankle, and they just cook these things to death. And then they scraped them all out with bulldozers and composted them or burnt them, whatever it was. The point of the story is buy all your pork off me. No, the point of the story is all these little factory farm piglets that they gave to all these homesteaders for free, and all these homesteaders were happy to have them. I really curiously watched this happen on all the forums and all the Facebook groups and all the Twitter threads. They couldn't keep them alive on the homesteads. They put them outside, they all got sunburnt, they all got diseased, and they all got nutrient deficiencies, and they call it dippy pig, so it's back dips and it loses its legs, and like, it was just absolute carnage. None of these pigs had a good experience because they're not fit for purpose. They've been raised for a very specific thing, and as humans, we're very good at being specialists. How do we get an extra gram a day out of that animal? You know, we're trying to be generalists here because we think being a specialist is a bit dangerous. Like if you're a highly esteemed doctor and you do your degree, and then you become a cancer specialist, and then you become a breast cancer specialist, and then you specialize in a certain type of breast cancer. If you talk to these doctors, everything in the world causes that type of breast cancer. You know, it's the crux of everything, and the world revolves around it. We're trying to deliberately involve in all different enterprises to try to keep a bit more of an open mind with how all these different things work. One of the best things that I've found at a restaurant is to give them feedback. Like I go somewhere locally and it says local pork on the menu, and I know local pork means Riverlea, which is a factory farm. Or sometimes it says Riverlea, and I know I'm not going to eat it, and I don't even want it. But I ask the waitress or the waiter, oh, it says local pork. Could you tell me where that's from? Oh, we don't know it. I don't know off the top of my head. I'll go and ask the chef. She goes and asks the chef. It's Riverlea. So then she comes back, she said, oh, it's Riverlea. I said, oh, okay, I don't eat caged animals. I'm just gonna get the wild caught trout. Don't give them a rizzle. You know, don't be impolite. Just give them that feedback. I own a restaurant. If my chef's got feedback like that 2 or 3 times in a week, they'd tell me. Like, Jake, the weirdest thing, we had 3 people say they don't want caged eggs, and they didn't order them. They just said they just got the bacon without the eggs, or whatever it is, you know. And then you'd get these restaurants making real changes. It'd take nothing. This would be an interesting case study to get a group of people and pepper a local establishment, target them, and see what would happen. But I've got local restaurants that have. I've got Yardbird in town. They're stocking our chicken. They do our pork as a special when it's available, and that was hard fought by me. Like, I had to go in and sell it on a business case. I had to build in some securities for them so they didn't lose out in the short term. And now I've built a great relationship with them, and people are going in there saying, we're so glad you have this on the menu, thank you so much. And now I've got the chef this close to taking canola oil out of his deep fryer, putting tallow in it. You know, these are great little gains. Like what this industry does, regenerative agriculture and, you know, community supported agriculture, we're really good at gaining ground, but we're not good at holding it. You know, so we can gain these little, you know, there'll be an, how come people are still eating factory farm pork after all that happened in COVID, when they're boiling pigs alive because they've got too many, they don't know what to do with them, and that's, you know, that's the RSPCA approved way of dealing with an oversupply. Like, why are people still eating this stuff? How can you be involved in that? So there's about 40 odd pigs in here. This pig's the age group behind the pigs at the front. So we've got about 90 heritage breed pigs on the farm at the moment. We've got Berkshires, these black boys, and the ones with the white stripes are Hampshire. So heritage breed, fit for purpose. We don't breed the pigs. We were breeding pigs. I had 20 sows at one stage, and we were breeding them. And it's a whole nother thing to worry about when you're going to join them, when they're going to farrow down, if this mum's going to be aggressive and get into her litter and splitting them up, and it's a whole business in itself. And you know, a lot of people in this scene get carried away with being everything, like doing the whole nose, like a farrow to fork, doing the whole lot of everything, and it's hard. A lot of these things require some real specialist attention. And I started processing pork in the butchery for a farmer up at Cootamundra, Jason Bates, a stock and piggle. And I said to him one day, will you sell me some weaner piglets? He goes, yeah, I'll just put your orders in and I'll send them. So we get, what do we do? We get 40 odd every 6 weeks. And he delivers them to the farm. They're 8 weeks old. They've been weaned. They're already trained to hot wire. He weans his piglets off their mums behind a single braid of polywire. You know, if you've ever dealt with pigs, that's remarkable. He'll have the piglets here, and he'll push mum over there, and he'll put this fence up between them and keep them away, which is just incredible actually. So we keep our pigs in with a single hot wire that's charged. You can see that one instep, that's electric. Pigs' eyesight is poor, especially heritage breeds with their floppy ears can sometimes cover it. And if a pig gets startled, they'll charge instead of backing up. Like some animals, if they get shocked, electric shock, they'll walk backwards. Pigs will run forwards. So the net there is not charged, and it's there as a visual aid. Just so the pigs, if they get zapped while they're rooting around, they're not looking where they're going, then they can see that what looks to them to be an impenetrable barrier, and they just back up. So by using that hot wire and then that visual aid, we've had no issues with keeping pigs in. Infrastructure is extremely basic. We've got a trampoline I picked up on Facebook for free with some tin that I tech screwed onto it that I picked up on Facebook for free for a bit of shade. That gets straw put out into it every couple of days, so that'll probably get topped up again today. We actually build a bit of a wall around it with little square bales. We leave the string on, and then 3 or 4 days they pull it apart and eat it, and then we pick up all the string and build them another one. That normally happens twice, and then they get moved, so it's a new paddock every week. So these guys are due for a move on Monday. So they've been in this paddock for 6 days. So you're seeing the paddock at the end of its impact. It'll probably have ruminants grazing it. Like the cattle will probably come in here and graze it middle of spring. Like when spring starts, you know, that's 3 months, let's say, it'll get going. This bounces back so quick because the pigs eat, like they root around and they eat grubs and tubers and they eat the grass. When you put them in a new paddock, it's actually amazing watching the pig graze. They spend the first day or two actually grazing, like cattle, and then they get their nose in the ground when they've exhausted all that grass. But they get ad lib grain, which is a similar mix to what the chickens get, but it's just a pig mix, optimised for pigs. But they deposit an enormous amount of nutrients while they're here because they're defecating a lot. So the paddocks, all my best little pockets on the farm of pasture have had pigs on them. It's really hard for a grazier to come and look at this. The first time I had pigs, and I'm watching Joel Salatin and Jordan Green and Greg Gunthorpe and all the pig gurus in America doing pasture-based pigs, and it all sounds so beautiful and idealistic. And then I put pigs out properly the first time. Heartbroken when you see this happen to your pasture. You know, they dig a wallow, they make a brick, they do all these different things. And then, but then you got to keep telling yourself it's not the impact. This is what pigs do in nature. They're a natural animal, you know, but animals aren't bad for the environment. This is what they do. They turn up to an area in a group, in a mixed age mob. They set up wallows, they set up camp every day. They travel a little bit further, grazing and rooting around for food. And then when they've exhausted the area, they pack up and set up camp somewhere else. So really high impact for a short amount of time. So we do help. Sometimes we'll come along with a cover crop and hand broadcast it behind them, especially areas that are really heavily impacted, like under the water trailer. In a drier season, if you don't give that a little bit of extra help, it'll hard pack. But for the What's that, sorry?
Another trampoline.
Yeah, maybe. These guys are starting, this is almost slaughter ready, some of these pigs. The ones at the front are too big, but you know, I spent all this money to go buy my own butchery and I can't even get my animals booked in when I want them. We're too busy. I said to the butcher, I need to get pigs in next week. He goes, look at the board. I looked at the board, it was a month. People put on a lot of weight in a month. So we're chasing our tail a little bit, but that's all right. We'll have some bigger pork.
What's in the feed?
It's basically the same as the chicken feed. So it's got all the same ingredients, but it's been optimized for pigs instead of chicken. So the protein level's a bit different. It's a vegetarian feed. I would love to be feeding my chickens and pigs feed with meat meal in it. But they're local because that's what their natural diet is. But none of the local mills do meat meal, because if you have a mill and you're making feed for feedlots, for cattle, sheep, if you're making horse feed, you can't have any meat traces. That's how the mad cow outbreak sort of roundabout happened. So I've had meat meal delivered to the farm once and it got trucked over from Adelaide. And it was amazing. Chickens did really well on it, but the truck got bogged and they said they won't come in until I get a turning pad in. So had to get a big crane here and everything. It was awesome. I've never wormed a pig. No. I've never vaccinated or wormed a pig. Yep. I don't know. They'll get wormy if you don't move them. Really, like if I kept them in this paddock a week longer than I was meant to, like all the greenery you see will be gone. They'll start to kill the trees. So these little trees, the ones there around those shrubs, and those couple smaller trees at the end of the paddock, you know, on the third week, they'll probably kill them by chewing the bark, ring barking them, rooting around the roots. And it'll get to the point where they've worked the ground so hard. See this tillage that they're doing, how it's making it fluffy? It gets to the point where they've pushed all the oxygen out of the ground and they turn it all to hard pack like this, where nothing will grow. And you've essentially, that's what a free range pig paddock is, because certified free range is a space requirement, not a rotation recovery requirement. So it takes 3 or 4 weeks and the paddock turns to this. And for all intents and purposes, they're on a concrete pad outside. The soil's got no function left. It's rammed earth. And then you've had them around. The parasites that a pig excretes in their manure, when the eggs hatch and of the parasite, and those parasites crawl up the leaf or and then the pig ingests it again, that life cycle is about 2 weeks. So if you can keep them skipping before then, you'll keep them ahead of their parasite cycles. Cattle and sheep, it's like a 3-day cycle, 2 or 3 day, you need to move them a lot quicker. Every animal's got their own cycle.
And at an abattoir, correct me if I'm wrong, they always check for worms in the liver.
Your animals will be condemned if there's something wrong for them in the guise of animal consumption.
I'm sure the abattoir guys check.
Yep.
Check the liver and they will check.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they'll look for liver fluke and all those.
No,
I've had one pig condemned once, so I've probably done, I don't know, maybe 600 pigs or so, and I called them to find out why, and they wouldn't say, because they didn't know. You know, the guy who condemned it went home, and you know, another guy on the line, so I got no idea why. You know, for all I know, it could have broken its leg walking up the race, and they're not allowed to process animals with those like if they can't support body weight. So I've really got no idea. But they're not problems that we spend any time devoting mental bandwidth to, because we're adhering to the principles of what the animal's natural expression is, and we're just not having the issues. Now, if I have, did you hear the pigs coughing when we got here?
Yeah.
That's pigs can handle the snow. Being cold isn't a problem for pigs, but cold nights and warm days wigs them out a little bit. So the last few nights we've had some pretty cold nights, and then it gets up to 16 and the sun's out and they're sunbaking, and it ruins their acclimatization to the cold nights, and they get that little cough. And if I hear that, we try to make an effort for extra bedding. So I'm looking at that, that's underbedded to me. Well, there's no bedding, they've eaten it all. Extra bedding, bit of seaweed meal in their feed. We lace out seaweed meal, and I make homemade biochar and I crush it up, feed it to the animals. When biochar's in the guts, it absorbs all the toxins. So we start feeding them out. So I've got like 4 or 5 wheelie bins of biochar in the shed. So we'll bring some biochar out this Arvo, I'll give it to the pigs, and it's just a bit of a tonic. These things that you feed your animals, you get on the permaculture pages, and you've got apple cider vinegar with garlic, you've got biochar, you've got seaweed meal. None of them are gonna bring an animal from the brink back, but they'll all help you keep your animals healthy. They're not they're not fixers, like they're aids. You know, so if you're giving your animals, if you're giving your chickens a bit of apple cider vinegar as you go, and you're giving your animals some nice supplements like that, it's good for them. It's like taking having an oyster before dinner. It's too expensive, right? We'll talk about it later, but there's all these deferred costs. My son Theodore gets his daily protein requirement for pasture based protein for $2 in his first meal of the day. You know, 2 pasture-raised protein eggs. He's 3 years old, that's his daily protein requirement, done for $2. Like, what are we comparing it against? Are we comparing it to a 4 wheat bix in soya milk with maple syrup on it or caster sugar? Like my mum that's what we used to have. Like we'd have strawberries and sugar, like all this stuff in there. Like, what's the cost of that? Like, are we really comparing? My boys get up in the morning and they are just wired eggs. And if you overcook the yolk, won't eat it. You know, they know what's bioavailable. Yep. To give you an idea, the pigs in the commodity sheds versus this, it's the same thing. It's air conditioned, manure's exported, so there's a effluent management program. So they're viewing manure as a liability, not an asset, which should ring your alarm bells. Staff often wearing hazmat suits to work, under the guise of hygiene to stop outbreaks and whatever else it is. Fed vegetarian diets, like ours are given a vegetarian grain because it's what we've got available, but they're not vegetarian by nature because if one of those chickens are too slow, they might be gone. But there's bugs and grubs in the ground and what they would ever find. Wallow, a pig in a factory farm can't wallow. They're on concrete, right? When I say what's the natural, animal welfare respects the natural expression of an animal, what do pigs do? What's the number one thing every school kid says? Wallows. Why does a pig wallow? They can't sweat, so they do it to cool down. They burn in strong sunlight, so they do it to put a mud mask on. They're putting a long sleeve t-shirt on when they're wallowing. And if they get fleas, lice and ticks, they lay in the water and drown them. You're taking the whole pig's hygiene regime away from them. So you think they're getting dirty in the mud, they're actually cleaning themselves. And pigs have manure corners, I think this is it. You know, like they're very, very clever animals. So by taking them out of their natural environment, of course you're going to have to defer to effluent management programs and subtherapeutic antibiotics and vaccinations and all these other things because they don't have a chance. You've robbed them of everything they need, let alone they cut the tail off, they grind the teeth out. And in the big sheds where they've got the sows breeding, there's 2 or 3 boars in the corner because the sows won't ovulate properly unless they can smell the testosterone coming from the boars in the corner. But the boars can smell the sows ovulating and can't get to them. A boar's erection is a corkscrew, if you've ever seen it. They will find cracks in the concrete and rip their sphincter to bits because they're so charged, smelling these 400 sows next to them, they can't handle it. One of my farm hands used to work in this environment. He'd deal with this. It's absolutely cruelty. Yeah, and every piece of bacon you've ever eaten has come from it.
There's a lot of commonalities between us and the vegan agenda that you were mentioning, Franco, which is we both want to see the end of factory farming, but the solution is just different. We don't believe that everyone should be eating a monocrop, grain-based soy and wheat diet that had its own animal side effect and kill off through combine harvesting. But the solution is something like this. But yeah, we agree that the factory is not the solution.
I agree with vegans on almost everything. You know, like it's got to the point for me, I probably wanted to stop eating a lot of it myself. Like, how can you eat an animal once you know where it's come from, what it's done? Get on YouTube and watch a free documentary that the vegans put together in Australia, little Ren, called Dominion. Write it down, it's called Dominion, and it's expose footage from Australian feedlots, abattoirs. They go through, so they do broilers, they do layers, they do pigs, they do feedlots, abattoirs. You know, a lot of it's sensationalised. I actually run workshops here and we watch a bit of it when we do the workshops so people can sort of understand the real difference. A lot of it is sensationalised a little bit, as you'd expect, but you know, there's not good stuff happening.